war clouds gather. The sirens screamed again in Tel Aviv last week. Families rushed into shelters, grabbing their kids, their pets, their prayers. On the other side of the desert, Iranian drones filled the skies over U.S. bases in Iraq. We're not talking about distant possibilities anymore. This war, the one between Israel and Iran, it's already breathing down our necks. Now here's what the news won't always lay out clearly for you. Iran has enriched uranium to 60% according to the IAEA in 2024. That's just a small technical step away from weapons grade, and let's be honest, everybody knows it. Israel's not waiting around. They've got a whole doctrine for this. They call it the octopus doctrine. Hit the tentacles before the head. That means targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Syria, and Hamas in Gaza. All of them are supported, funded, trained, armed by Tehran. In just the past 2 years, 2023 to 2025, we've seen a sharp spike in sabotage missions, cyber attacks, and deadly proxy battles. Israel's conducted multiple airstrikes in Damascus. Iran has responded with precision drone attacks, targeting Israeli-linked assets abroad. This isn't just saber-rattling. It's shadow war turned real. And here's where it gets worse. Israel recently completed its biggest ever military drill, simulating an all-out war with Iran on multiple fronts. Not just one, all of them. Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, even threats inside Israel itself. It's chess, but everyone's playing with matches and gasoline. And yet, something about all this feels strangely familiar, as if we've seen it before, not just in headlines, but in something older, a feeling, a warning, a prophecy? Because what if this war didn't start in 2023? What if it was already written 2,000 years ago? In ancient scrolls, in sacred books, in the words of prophets who had no satellites or nukes, but saw fire falling from the sky. I'm going to piece together the signs, the names, the verses, and the terrifying possibility that what's happening now was always meant to happen. Ready or not, it's time to take a closer look. Part 1. The Biblical Warnings, Israel at the Center of Prophecy. So here's where things start to get really strange. Because while the headlines are screaming about uranium levels and missile strikes, there's an older source that might have already called all of this. And it wasn't from CNN or the Pentagon. It was from the Bible. Let's talk about Ezekiel 38 and 39. Probably one of the most debated, eerie, and detailed war prophecies in the entire Old Testament. This section talks about a future war against Israel involving a leader named Gog from the land of Magog. And right there in verse 5, one of the nations listed as part of the invasion is Persia. Yeah, Persia. That's Iran. Now pause for a second and let that sink in. A prophet, writing around 2,600 years ago, mentioned a military alliance involving Persia that would rise up to attack Israel in the latter days. And it doesn't end there. Ezekiel describes a group of nations that come from the far north and join forces with Persia. A lot of modern scholars, especially evangelical researchers in the U.S., have drawn connections here to Russia. Because if you trace a line due north from Israel, where do you land? Moscow. And who's been supplying Iran with drones, nuclear materials, and strategic backing? In 2023, Iran officially joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization with Russia and China, locking in deeper military and economic cooperation. If that's not a northern alliance, I don't know what is. Now, some people say, okay, sure, but prophecies are vague, right? Fair. But let me show you something even more direct. Isaiah 17, one verse, one line, but it hits hard. It says, Damascus will cease to be a city. It will become a heap of ruins. Damascus is the capital of Syria, the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world, but right now, southern Damascus is full of rubble. Israeli airstrikes have hit dozens of Iranian weapons depots there. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is active in that region, and multiple Iranian officers have been killed in targeted strikes just this year. In January 2024, Israel hit Damascus International Airport again because Iran was allegedly smuggling advanced missiles into Syria. What's wild is that we're watching this verse go from metaphor to breaking news. This prophecy doesn't sound ancient anymore. It sounds like this week's update. But let's push it further, because Revelation 16, the last book of the Bible, adds another piece to this puzzle. It says the Euphrates River will dry up to prepare the way for the kings of the east to march toward Armageddon. Now here's what's chilling. The Euphrates is actually drying up. Like physically, it's not symbolic. Thanks to drought, damming, and climate change, the Euphrates has shrunk to historic lows. In 2022, satellite images showed large stretches of the riverbed completely exposed. Iraq and Syria have both declared water emergencies. Turkish dams upstream have cut the flow dramatically. This isn't fantasy, it's hydrology. And who are the kings of the East? That's been debated for centuries, but many believe it could refer to a coalition of Eastern Islamic powers, possibly including Iran, maybe even involving countries like Pakistan or China. Keep in mind, Iran has been working hard to build regional military ties, from Iraq to Afghanistan, and it's not just alliances, it's preparation. Iran has missiles that can now reach Tel Aviv in under 12 minutes. So let's put this together. You've got Persia, mentioned by name in Ezekiel, teaming up with a northern power, possibly Russia. You've got Damascus, already crumbling, just like Isaiah said. You've got the Euphrates drying up in real time, just as Revelation predicted. And then, of course, the build-up to Armageddon, not the Hollywood kind, but the actual biblical term, referring to Har Megiddo, a real place in northern Israel that's historically been the site of many major battles. Is all of this a coincidence? Maybe, or maybe not. Because here's the thing. Even if you don't believe in prophecy, the people in power do. Leaders, especially in the Middle East, often read scripture alongside intelligence briefings. That's not a theory, that's documented. And when those beliefs influence decisions, that's when ancient words become modern fire. So let me ask you something. Are we just watching another geopolitical rivalry? Or are we witnessing a script that's been written thousands of years ago, finally being acted out? Because when you line up the maps with the verses, it doesn't feel random anymore. It feels scripted. And this script is just getting started. Part 2, Nostradamus and Mystics, Shadows from the Past. All right, so we just walked through the Bible. Clear verses, real places, specific names. But let's say you're still not convinced. Maybe you think, okay, that's scripture. Maybe those prophecies are just religious narratives. Then explain this. How do we end up with multiple seers from different cultures, centuries apart, with no contact with each other, describing the same kind of war centered around the same region in almost identical symbols? Let's start with the most famous one, Nostradamus. The French astrologer wrote over 900 four-line verses, quatrains, in the 16th century. He didn't use names directly. He spoke in code, symbolism, anagrams, because if he didn't, he'd probably be burned at the stake. But some of his predictions, they feel too close to ignore. There's one in particular, Century 2, Quatrain 41. The great star will burn for 7 days. The cloud will make 2 suns appear. The big mastiff will howl all night. When the great pontiff changes his land. Now stop. Think about this like 2025. A great star burning in the sky for 7 days? People have linked this to a nuclear missile strike, especially with warheads that burn bright upon re-entry. And 2 suns? That's been interpreted as the blinding flash of a nuclear detonation. It's not science fiction. That's literally what a detonation over a city would look like. Another quatrain, Century 5, Quatrain 25, says, "The Arab prince of Mars, Sun, Venus, Leo, the rule of the church will be overcome by the sea. Toward Persia very nearly 1,000,000 men. Byzantium will succumb to the sword." Let that one sink in. Persia is mentioned again, just like in Ezekiel. And what's Persia today? Iran. 1,000,000 men? Sounds like a massive mobilization. And that Arab prince of Mars? Mars was the god of war. Could that be a reference to a rising military figure in the Muslim world? Maybe even a messianic figure like the Mahdi, who's expected in Shia Islam to appear during a final war? And this isn't just Nostradamus playing word games, because across the continent in Bulgaria, a blind woman named Baba Vanga was saying similar things. She died in 1996, but before she passed, she made hundreds of predictions, and a disturbing number of them came true. The Kursk submarine disaster, 9/11, the rise of ISIS, and one of her most chilling prophecies? She warned that a great Muslim war would begin in the early 21st century, leading to the fall of Europe and major destruction in the West. She claimed this conflict would start as a small skirmish, but grow uncontrollably, eventually drawing in major world powers. Now ask yourself this: if the next Israeli-Iranian war escalates, with Hezbollah, Syria, Gaza, and even nuclear threats, how long before the U.S. steps in? How long before NATO is pulled into the chaos? And what happens after that? How did a blind woman in Eastern Europe and a monk in France all talk about a catastrophic war involving the Middle East, Persia, and fire raining down, without ever meeting each other, without any modern context? They lived in different centuries, they spoke different languages, but somehow the shadows they saw look a lot like our headlines today. And that's not even the strangest part. Because when prophecies start to cross cultures and point to the same place, the same time, and the same type of destruction, maybe it's not coincidence anymore. Maybe it's a pattern, maybe it's a warning, and maybe we're already past the point of no return. Part 3. Islamic and Jewish prophecies. A shared vision of war. You know what's crazy? For two sides that have been locked in conflict for decades, Jews and Muslims, they actually agree on something. They both believe a huge, world-shaking war is coming. Not just any war, a divine one. A war that's supposed to tear down the old world and bring in something new. And that idea is not hidden in the background, it's right there, front and center, in their religious texts, in their sermons, and even, believe it or not, in the speeches of some of today's political leaders. Let's start with Islamic prophecy. There's a term in the Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, called Malhama al-Kubra. It literally means the great slaughter. It's described as a final massive battle between the Muslims and their enemies just before the Day of Judgment. Some narrations even mention 99 out of 100 people dying in this war. We're not talking metaphor here. It's supposed to be brutal, global, and apocalyptic. Now here's where it gets even more intense. In Shia Islam, especially the Iranian version, this war isn't just expected. It's welcomed as the event that will bring the return of Imam Mahdi. He's seen as the final savior, the one who will lead Muslims to justice and victory in the end times. But his arrival, according to Shia belief, only comes after chaos, collapse, and conflict, especially involving the Middle East. And Iran's leadership leans heavily on that. In fact, Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, has directly referenced apocalyptic themes in his speeches. Back in 2020, he said, "The world is moving toward a great event. We must prepare for the appearance of the Mahdi." Not religious poetry, a political speech. That's a government openly embracing the idea that war may be necessary for prophecy to be fulfilled. That's not theory, that's their doctrine. Now switch perspectives. Because in Judaism, there's a very similar framework, and it centers around a war called Gog uMagog, the War of Gog and Magog, which we actually already touched on in Ezekiel. But this isn't just seen as some abstract Old Testament idea. In many Jewish traditions, this war is the final war before the Messiah appears. It's described as a combined physical and spiritual battle, not just armies clashing, but also a war of good versus evil, light versus darkness. It's supposed to be global, terrifying, and rooted again in the land of Israel. And yes, modern Jewish leaders are paying attention. In the Chabad movement, one of the largest Hasidic Jewish groups, many rabbis have suggested that the threat from Iran may be part of the Gog-Magog timeline. They point to the language in Ezekiel which names Persia, and they say the time matches. Even the Orthodox chief rabbi of Israel has spoken publicly about the possibility that we are living in pre-messianic time. Now let me pause right here and ask you something. What happens when both sides, both Israel and Iran, believe that a war isn't just coming, but has to come in order for their Messiah or Mahdi to appear? What kind of peace can exist when war is seen as sacred? Because here's the twist no one wants to talk about. They both think they're on God's side. They both believe the other is the evil that must be defeated, and they both believe victory is promised. That's what makes this so dangerous. This isn't just about oil or land or politics anymore. This is about destiny. Iran isn't just building nukes. They believe they're preparing the way for divine justice. Israel isn't just defending its borders. Many believe they're fulfilling the promises made to Abraham. And that means we're not just watching a war between nations. We're watching a war between prophecies. A war that, for both sides, ends with one conclusion: total transformation. So maybe this is why peace talks always fall apart, why ceasefires never last, why every time it gets quiet it suddenly explodes again. Because how can you make peace when both sides think God already wrote the ending? And if that's true, if this isn't just politics but a battle of beliefs, then what happens next might not depend on diplomats or generals. It might depend on how much of that prophecy people are still willing to follow. And that is what makes this all feel so unstoppable. Part 4. Omens in the sky and land, lands we can't ignore. Let's hit pause and ask, are the signs already here? I mean literally in the sky, earth, water, and even missile trails. First up, blood moons. Back in March 13-14, 2025, a total lunar eclipse, Aka, a blood moon, was visible over Israel and lasted for 6 hours. People saw it painting the moon deep red, and not just on any night. It happened during Purim, a major Jewish festival. Rabbis like Jason Sobel pointed out that a blood moon on Purim echoes words from Joel and Acts, the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day. Then, mark your calendars for September 7, 2025. Another blood moon is predicted over Jerusalem, lasting about 82 minutes. It's happening just before Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. Again, right when spiritual tension peaks. Next, dive into the Dead Sea, a stunning natural wonder, but also weird. In 2025, it was listed as one of the world's most unusual natural sights that mirrors what Ezekiel 47 foretold: fresh water flowing and fish thriving. On top of that, there have been more than 6,000 sinkholes around the Dead Sea shoreline since the 2000s. These massive holes aren't from bombs. They're from the ground collapsing due to salt layer erosion. But symbolically, the earth itself seems to be breaking apart under the sacred land. Widen the lens. Earthquakes near the Euphrates have become more common. Remember February 2023, a quake that killed over 50,000 across southern Turkey and northern Syria? That's near the river connected with Revelation 16. Prophecy says the Euphrates will dry up to prepare the way for kings of the east. And guess what? Water levels have dropped dramatically because of drought and damming. Rivers and canals are literally turning to sand beds. Now mix in strange lights over battle zones, flashes in southern Lebanon, Syria, even Gaza. And just this July, there were reports of LEDs and flashes over southern Israel when jets struck Yemen's Houthis. On July 1, missiles fired from Yemen triggered sirens over Jericho, the Dead Sea, and Jerusalem. That same morning, Israeli jets bombed Houthi ports in Yemen. Hodeidah, Ras Isa, Salif Plus, a power plant. Houthis responded with missiles toward Israel. Sirens blared across the Dead Sea basin. Cosmic signs or real war signals? Ask yourself. Ancient scriptures said, "There will be signs in the heavens above and on the earth below. Blood, fire, pillars of smoke." Sounds like Acts 2:19 echoing Joel. If you close your eyes, that sounds like rocket trails, missile sirens, cratered land, molten fire. So are these all just coincidences? A lunar event here, some fish there, quakes over there? Or are they cosmic warnings, a pattern we're scoring out against reality? Because if skies are turning red on Purim and Rosh Hashanah, if the ground is collapsing beneath the Dead Sea, if rivers meant to flow are drying up, if missile trails and sirens sync with these events, then maybe we aren't just watching the build-up to a war. Maybe we're not listening to the signs, and if we can't hear them now, who will? Part 5. When prophecy shape policies. Let's get honest for a second. Because war isn't just about missiles and tanks anymore, it's also about beliefs, about how people in power see the world and what they think is meant to happen. In the last part, we talked about signs, moons turning red, rivers drying up, fish returning to the Dead Sea. But here's the twist. Those signs, some leaders actually think they mean something divine, something scripted. Let's start with Israel. For decades, Zionist leaders have described the return of the Jewish people to their homeland as not just political, but biblical. We're talking about references to God's covenant with Abraham, to the land from Dan to Beersheba, to the promise that Israel will rise again in the last days. And that belief runs deep. Israeli ambassador to the United Nations Danny Danon once said, "We have biblical rights to the land. The Bible is our deed." And when you look at some of the IDF's operations, their names, their locations, a lot of them trace straight back to biblical language. Military analysts have even pointed out how parts of Israeli defense doctrine are rooted in Scripture. That's not metaphor, it's military policy. Now on the other side, Iran is doing the same thing, just in a different language. Death to Israel is not just some angry chant. It's tied to a long-term apocalyptic worldview. In Iran's Shia ideology, especially under Khomeini's thought, Israel is seen as a temporary regime that must collapse before the appearance of the Mahdi, the hidden imam who is expected to return in the end time. And this isn't some fringe idea. Iran's top leaders, including Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, have publicly linked their strategic patience to divine timing. He once said in a 2020 speech, "We are moving toward the appearance of the Mahdi. Our mission is to prepare." So when Iran funds Hezbollah or supports Hamas or escalates in Syria, part of that calculation is religious. They believe they're aligning themselves with a divine timeline. That's why they don't rush. That's why they don't fear total war. Now throw the United States into the mix. Because U.S. foreign policy, especially in the Middle East, hasn't just been about oil and democracy. There's a strong undercurrent of evangelical Christian influence, especially when it comes to supporting Israel. Politicians know this. That's why U.S. presidents, especially from the Republican Party, often double down on support for Israel with almost religious language. In 2018, when the U.S. moved its embassy to Jerusalem, Vice President Mike Pence said it was fulfilling a promise made to the Jewish people thousands of years ago. There's the question, when you've got three different governments, Israel, Iran, and parts of the U.S., all making decisions not just based on strategy, but based on prophecy. What happens to diplomacy? How do you negotiate peace when someone believes God already wrote the ending? How do you de-escalate when both sides think they're playing out their divine role? Because once you see yourself as part of a sacred script, you don't back down, you don't compromise, you fulfill the prophecy. And maybe that's why nothing seems to work in the Middle East. No matter how many peace talks, no matter how many UN resolutions, it always goes back to fire. Because in the minds of these leaders, war isn't failure. War is destiny. And if that's how they see it, then the next question we have to ask is, what happens when the script reaches its final scene? The path forward, are we walking into fate? So, what now? What happens if one rocket goes too far? If a single strike on an Iranian nuclear site spirals into retaliation from Hezbollah, Syria, even Yemen? What if Israel responds with full force? What if the U.S. steps in? What if Russia or China decides to play its hand? These aren't just hypotheticals anymore. They're dominoes, and some of them are already falling. One small skirmish could trigger a total war. One miscalculation could bring global alliances into the fire, and before we know it, we're staring at something way bigger than Israel or Iran. People call it World War III like it's some far-off nightmare. But what if it's just waiting for the right spark? And still, through all of this, there's one question we keep skipping over. What if the purpose of prophecy isn't to predict the end? What if it's to stop it? Maybe these ancient texts weren't about fate. Maybe they were warnings, messages passed down for generations to shake us awake, to get us to change course before it's too late. But here we are, with nukes, drones, holy cities, and ancient grudges, and it feels like the script is writing itself. And yet, it doesn't have to end this way, because prophecy doesn't take away our choice. It just reminds us of what's at stake. Look around. The signs are all here. Blood moons, cracked earth, ancient names in breaking news. It's all happening in the same place. The land where prophets walked, where kings fell, where temples once stood. The Middle East has always been a battlefield of empires, but maybe now it's become the final mirror of humanity. This isn't just about Israel and Iran, it's about all of us, whether we blindly follow a path of destruction or finally wake up together before the final seal is broken. So ask yourself, are we repeating ancient warnings, or are we fulfilling them? Because prophecy is not a guarantee, it's a warning. And the ending, it's still being written.